All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Well, I see Melinda's at it again with her cool background, unless she's it falls somewhere. I don't think we're able to rewind time. That's pretty cool. Uh, so I had a couple of questions, actually more statements this week. A couple questions, but most statements of just, hey, I'm using it this way. Is that okay? And any way you're using the practice of mindfulness is 100% okay with me. If you're still showing up, which some of you are, which is awesome, uh, we have to look at how can we shape this so it works in your life. That's my number one most important thing, right? Like I'm not interested in just talking to talk. That's not really my deal. I'm interested in how can we make this work in your life, in what you're doing for work and for life. How can we start doing this, right? How can we start integrating it? And the next series is a whole series on self-compassion. This week's teaching is an introduction to self-compassion. I'm going to do a shorter version of it because we have 4 weeks to kind of really explore it. So I want to take some time to answer questions. And most importantly, I want to look at an acronym that you can use for this idea of self-compassion in your own practice, right? To me, if you are helping and working with humans at any level, I believe the practice of self-compassion is the most important practice that you can have. Why? How much energy do you have going out in a day? Probably a lot. And not just at work, like energy that people are taking from you that you're not even, they're not even paying you for. It's one thing if you're getting paid. I remember when I worked at Children's Aid, I would constantly be losing, I would be hemorrhaging energy because I'd be constantly like, my phone would go, and I'd be like, like, who's here to yell at me now? Right. And I'd feel like this. And when I started getting into the practice of mindfulness, what I started to realize, thankfully, was I wasn't filling up my cup ever. And when I was filling up my cup, I was probably filling up my cup with negative things. Like, for me, I was really good at filling up my cup up with beer. And or like wine. I'm Italian, French. So obviously I like red wine. So I would have wine. And that became fairly problematic because that was like my way of dealing with stuff sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes. And when I started getting into the practice of mindfulness, it was like all of a sudden I had this tool that I could just apply to stuff. And I'm like, oh, I'm really stressed. I'm noticing it here. Oh, my mind's really in the future. Okay, let me bring it back. And you only really get that from doing a repetition of this practice. Yesterday I had like a really cool, I get like sometimes like really beautiful moments. And I was talking to this 16-year-old who I've been working with for about 3 or 4 months. And I said, oh, so how are things going? And she said, amazing. I just feel like I have the most awareness I've ever had. And I was like, well, that's pretty cool. And she said, you must have like been so annoyed talking to me like months ago. And I started laughing. I said, why? She goes, I was just complaining about the dumbest stuff that like probably doesn't matter. And she's like, I'm catching myself out on that now. And I said, well, number one, you weren't annoying me because most people are caught in stuff that they can't, that might happen. But this is about training your brain to be more present. And if she can do it, 100%, you all can do it. It just takes the energy of showing up, right? Showing up to listening to me talk for 20 or 30 minutes for X amount of, let's say 8 or 12 times. If you just do that, you might pick up a little quick hits and tips, we could say. But the reality is you're not doing the workout to change how you see or perceive your stress. And I believe it's the exact same thing when we look at self-compassion. If you don't train your mind to be present and love yourself, it's really hard to all of a sudden just implement it, right? Just like when I talked about before about like developing a swimming stroke, right? We don't want to learn a new swimming stroke when we're in the ocean. And we're like, hey, try that like treading thing out you've never tried before. It's like, what? What's that? How are we going to do that? Like when the waves are crashing down, it's really hard to kind of catch your breath. It's the exact same, in my opinion, with learning a mental health, a positive, like healthy hygiene technique mentally. One of those techniques is what I want to go in today, which is an acronym, and it's RAIN. Last week we were exploring some of the practices we've explored in the previous 2 weeks, working with emotions, or what I call noting emotions. We've also explored, all right, can I just let this be here just for this moment? Can I allow this emotion to be here just for this moment? Not the next 30 moments, for this moment, right? This is the same idea, is that everything is impermanent, and there is this kind of like rise and fall that happens to everything that we experience, right? Like a perfect example of how we get caught in the future. So my wife is a physiotherapist, and she typically specializes like in women's health. And uh, she came home from work, and I was like, "How's your day?" She's like, "Oh, good." And it was like, it was Good Friday. She was had a nice day at work. And then all of a sudden, at like 9 o'clock at night, her like energy changed. It was just like boop. And she loves when I tell stories about her too, just strangers. So it's like I told her I've been using this this situation to show like how the mind gets stuck. So all of a sudden we're like on my couch, she's like right here, and I just feel like she's like, oh, like annoyed. And I'm first think like what I do, like is there, like, did I leave something out? Did I spill water and it's on the car? I'm looking on the hardwood floor. Like I'm just going to like, what did I do? I'm like, what's going on? She's like, nothing. And I'm like, well, that's obviously something, right? So I said, what is it? She goes, you're gonna get mad. I'm like, what? She's like, I just checked my work email. I'm like, why are you checking your work email at 9 o'clock on a Friday, my love? And she goes, I was just bored. I was like, so that's what you do when you're bored? You check your work email? Like, I was like, it's 9 o'clock on Friday. When do you work? And she goes, you know when? I'm like, right, Monday at 11. That's 3 days away. We have like Friday night together. We have all of Saturday, all of Sunday, and then like probably 3 hours before you have to go to work that we are together on Monday. Do you really need to check your email now? And she's like, no. And I'm like, did we make a rule? Like, isn't this one of the rules of the Masse house? Not to check your work email? It's pertaining to you, really? And she's like, I know. I'm like, well, so what's bugging you? And she goes, well, she had to take Monday off because, she had this like thing in her eye. And I think I told the story last week. And so she had to take the day off work. And then a patient apparently messaged in and was like really angry. She didn't get more than 24 hours notice. I'm like, well, I would fire that patient if it was me. But I don't, you don't do that. So your patient, if you can't go into work on short notice, that's like you gave them 18 hours. I think that's pretty good. Or 12 hours, sorry. And so then she says, she worried the weekend that her patient was going to be angry. And she worried like it was her 4 o'clock or it was her 6 o'clock patient. So she was worried about the weekend. It kept coming in her mind. And I'm like, okay, like just notice that. And then she went into work on Monday. And where was her mind? When she's with her 11 o'clock patient, she's going to 6 o'clock. And then as things got closer, her anxiety went up, right? You know what the beautiful part of the story is? That 6 o'clock patient put the wrong date down in her book and didn't show up. So like, this is the best freaking story ever. I wrote it down my phone yesterday because I told my wife I'm going to use it all the time now. Because how many times did my beautiful wife worry about something that will never happen? And it was a lot. It was a lot. And I said to her Friday night, if this was me worrying about something on Monday, what would you say? And she's like, I would tell you to like not worry about it. I'm like, and that wouldn't do anything to my mind, would it? Because I'd just be like, okay, I can't say, Jen, don't worry about it. But what we can work with is we can work with what emotion is there. We can work with the frustration, or we can work with like the anxiousness. We can work with those emotions in the present moment. You can't work with what your patient might say or a human that you're supporting might say at 6 p.m. 3 days from now. And then they don't show, which is like the best part of the freaking story. Because she wrote the day down wrong. It's the best part of the story. My teacher said to me years ago, thankfully, Mike, there's no need to worry twice. Like when it happens, you can worry. You can bring that worry forward and we can go, how are we going to work with this? But what most people do, in my humble experience, is what happened to my wife on Friday. Most people are worried about stuff that might happen, could happen, should happen, or they're rehashing all the crap that like they wish they did differently. I'm not here to say that you cannot spend any time in the future. You have to plan, right? Like if there's ever allowed weddings again, and you have to go to a wedding, like don't pick out your outfit maybe like 6 minutes before you go. Like, probably plan it out, like get it ironed or dry cleaned or something, whatever y'all have to do. But like the reality to me is there's a difference between planning and living in the future. And what I found is that someone who has a regular practice of self-care is just nicer to themselves. Like they just talk to themselves in a nicer way. So instead of being like, you know what, Linda, you should have done this. Like you always do that. You go, whoa, 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 whoa. I was really stressed. I was really rushed. And you can talk to yourself as if you're talking to someone that you like, hence maybe even love, which I know is foreign for most of you, right? I'm not saying that because I know you individually and I'm like, you guys, you're so mean to yourself. But I work with, the stats, and the stats show that most people talk a lot of trash to themselves. They're just like this, right? Like if, Melinda hired me to follow her around and talk to her, perhaps how she talks to herself, she might tell me to, or give me like a little one of those within the first like 80 seconds of me hanging out with her. Because that's what we do. We talk a lot of trash to ourselves. And you're like, how does this have anything to do with self-compassion? It has everything to do with self-compassion. Because if your internal dialogue is this, and statistically speaking, let's say 80+% of it is negative, right? That's what the, kind of the data shows, that 83% of the time we hold on to the negative over the positive, especially when it comes to your mind being analytical, right? If you put on like a pair of pants and you're like, oh, your pair of pants feel a little tighter, you're like, you idiot, I know you shouldn't be eating that in the last couple of weeks, and da 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 da. Like we have all these judgments and thoughts. Now your mind's not saying that to be mean to you. It's saying that actually for motivation purposes, because it's bringing it to your awareness. The same reason, like when my kids, like my youngest, so I made food. I do all the cooking in the house. So I made dinner, for my kids so they could hopefully be quiet during this time with you, right? Which is always somewhat of a struggle. And I made food for them. And Bo just wants to eat like all the really good stuff. And like he's really good at eating his vegetables, but like, he's like, Daddy, can I have popcorn now? I'm like, no, you can't live off pretzels and popcorn. Now, if I let him, he would, of course. But I have to be like, no, make sure you eat all this and all of that, and like try some of your rice, please. And like both my kids don't really eat meat, so it's like, it's cool, whatever. But I'm like, okay, have some like almonds or da 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 da, right? And it's like I have to kind of lay down that wood sometimes, so the kids are like, okay, because that's like my role as a dad. I told them my role is make sure that you are like the best humans possible. That's my job, right? Now sometimes that job is hard, as some of you know, and I look at this the same way. Like I have this chatter in my mind trying to help me navigate and watch out for danger and watch out for frustration and watch out for what might happen. My brain is constantly doing that, right? If I'm talking to you, I can only see about three or four of you at a time on my screen because I do it on my phone. And let's say 75% of you are like, I'm talking, you're just like doing this, or you're like that. I'm gonna be like, oh my god, like what are they thinking? Like, why? How can I change this? Like my mind's doing that purposely. Your mind will do that. But when we can notice that as a judgment or a thought, and then come back to what is actually happening in the present moment, that is one of the biggest gifts you can give yourself. So I want to do one practice. When you go on the link and to do your weekly practice, there's going to be 2 practices. I want you just to focus on this one this week, right? Because of the questions that I had coming in this week, or the comments were more about like how to use it informally in life. I really want to spend this week, because we have lots of weeks together, I want to spend this week in particular looking at how you can apply the practice informally. How you can apply the practice of mindfulness, not only formally listening with your earbuds and your headphones on to my voice, but how can you actually apply it in real life when you need it? Okay. And this is the practice of rain. And I believe the practice of rain is one of the most important practices. Right. When I first learned the practice of rain, which I think was I would say about 12 years ago, it resonated with me right away. And I realized that I was holding things typically very tightly. Like I said, instead of holding the knife in its correct position, right, on like the handle, I was holding it by the blade a lot of the time, and like doing this. And I'd be like, okay, and then I'll flip the blade around and hold it like this. I'm like, hey, all of a sudden I can hold like my frustration like this, and it's not as hurtful. And when we can develop a practice of self-care, we can recognize what's present. That's the R in rain, right? So I'm not asking you, all right, well, let's let's avoid this emotion. I'm asking you what is present right now. So we just first go, okay, well, I'm recognizing that this is present. I'm recognizing that I'm frustrated. I'm recognizing that I'm sad. I'm recognizing that I'm angry. Cool. The next one, the A, is accept or acknowledge it. Now, I find the language of acceptance, most people resist, right? Like I'm working with this woman, and I was asking her about, well, can you accept, your diagnosis? And she's like, no, I like live my life. I thought really well, and like A, B, C, and D. And I'm like, okay, well, can we just acknowledge it that this is your diagnosis? Just like I ask many people to acknowledge their sadness. It doesn't mean you like it. I find the word acceptance has like this, people think like, well, they have to like it. It's like, we don't have to like any of this. If you were angry, can you recognize it? Well, probably. Are you able to acknowledge that it's here? Are you able to acknowledge that your suffering is here? You're probably going to say yes. It doesn't mean you like it and you want it to stay longer. Okay, please understand that. Then the I is investigate where it resides or where it's most present. So if you start with, okay, Mike, I recognize that I'm angry. I've acknowledged that I'm angry. What do you mean investigate? Well, identify where does that anger reside? For me, anger typically is right here. It's here too. Like, I'm Italian and French, so I can hold a grudge like, pretty good, pretty well. My mom and I were just talking about that today, actually, because my youngest son, we were walking home from school, and he's a piece of work. And he was like, Dad, you know how I told, let's call this kid Bob. I told Bob he's like my new best friend. He's really not. I'm just gathering information. And I'm like, you're gathering information to do what, Dozer? He's like, I don't know, but he wronged me 2 years ago. I was like, so now you're gathering information to do what? He's like, I don't know what I'm gonna do with it yet. So like every time I pick him up, I'm like, you get any information today? And my mom's like, oh my God, he is such a Masse. He's holding a grudge. He's only in grade 1. He's talking literally something happened in JK. Right? So like, I think it's funny. But I think it's like perfect how the ego works. Our ego, like my teacher was saying that our ego holds on to our like wrongs as if we're a Rottweiler holding on to a slipper. And we're like, no, like this is no. And we're like doing this crazy thing. You know what I mean? So when we're looking at this emotion and when we're looking at how to work with it in a healthy way, if you can recognize that you're angry and acknowledge that the anger resides, and if you identify, all right, I'm noticing the anger is here and here, the last part, the N, which is non-attachment or non-judgment. So you are not that anger, you're experiencing the anger. Big one right there. I find language when we're working with emotions is everything. If I say I'm angry, then I'm like identifying and attached to that anger. I love to say I'm experiencing this anger, right? Or I'm noticing this anger. So just start there. Start with, if you can, not only can you not attach to it, but you can also not judge it. Because a lot of times people say, well, I'm angry and I shouldn't be that angry and they judge their anger. And as soon as you say you shouldn't be experiencing this emotion, as soon as it comes out of your mouth, you're telling yourself whatever you're experiencing organically is wrong. And it's really not true. If you're experiencing boredom, that's okay. You're allowed to be bored. If you're experiencing frustration or anger or shame, you're also allowed to experience that. Okay, what I suggest is that you very slowly and gently ask yourself, recognize what is present. Can you acknowledge what is present? Can you identify where it resides typically, or where is it the strongest? Because you might be like here, shoulders, might be a whole list of things. And then the N, non-attachment, right? Not judge yourself for having that experience. So let's do a brief little practice of this. And then if, we can do time for questions or whatever's going on. Again, I just wanted to really focus on the practice of rain, because if this was just a 4-part series and I wasn't going to see you ever again, then I would do both tonight. But because of the questions and the comments that I got this week, I really wanted to focus on how to integrate this practice formally to informally. Okay. So if you can, get as comfy as you can in your chair, or your comfy chair, non-comfy chair, or if you're on the lake, wherever you are. Okay. And what I'd ask you to do Just find a comfortable position, sitting or resting. So allowing your back to kind of find its proper position. And you're like, what does that even mean? Well, typically we want to bring awareness to our back by erecting our spine or elongating your spine, because an erect spine typically brings awareness to your body. And if you're like, Mike, I'm so comfortable laying against my comfy sofa, cool, do that. All right. Again, I like to work with whatever you're working with. So if you find that you're better leaning into something versus kind of bringing your back off of the chair, I really would rather you be comfortable. So again, doing what's best for you and just setting your intent for this very brief practice. So my intent for this practice is to cultivate the ability to recognize and accept my emotions, to identify where they reside, and most importantly, to hold them without judgment. So you can plant the seed to do that, or you can plant and water the seed to just be present in this practice without trying to go anywhere. Whatever resonates with you, I suggest you typically offer a suggestion for the practice. And then what I'd suggest you do is you just take this brief moment just to ask yourself, how am I doing right now? How am I doing right now? And purposely taking a breath in and out when you're ready. Just doing a couple cycles of purposely breathing in through your nose when you're ready. And when it feels right, to kind of just release that tension or pressure out the mouth when you're ready. Again, there's nowhere to go, there's nothing to do, but just purposely breathe in and then out. And then just ask yourself to bring forward this present moment in the here and now, and ask yourself to recognize what is present. So, whatever is present right now, maybe you feel calm, or maybe you feel neutral, or maybe you feel a little anxious, or maybe you feel bored. Again, whatever is there, just ask yourself, recognize what is present. So for me, when I ask myself to recognize what's present, I feel incredibly neutral. So I'm just recognizing that I feel neutral. I don't feel like 10 out of 10 happy. I don't feel sad. I just feel very kind of chill and neutral. And then ask yourself, are you able to accept what is present? Again, doesn't mean you like it or love it, or maybe you do like it and love it. It doesn't matter. We're asking yourself, can you just acknowledge that it's present? And again, anytime your mind wanders off, all I'd recognize is that your mind's wandering off and you're coming back to do the breath. You're breathing in and noticing that expansion. You're breathing out and noticing that breath leaving the body, going out, out, out. Recognize what is present, accept or acknowledge that it's present. And then the I, can you identify where this resides? So for me, this kind of neutral and chillness, to me, it actually feels more in my mind. Usually I feel things more somatically, but I'm actually more feeling this more cerebrally, and I'm feeling it in my mind. So I'm just identifying that this kind of chillness is maybe more of a mindset right now that I have, and I'm just acknowledging it, where it resides, where it's kind of camping out. And then the N, non-attachment. So this is not you, you're experiencing it. Now, I know if this is a pleasant event, you're like, no, but I want it to stay longer. Again, we're viewing this with non-attachment, or most importantly, non-judgment. You're not judging yourself. I'm not judging myself for feeling neutral or chill right now. I'm simply just noticing it. So if you have a slight angst, let it be here. Let it be here. Again, not trying to go anywhere, not trying to do anything, but allow it to just be here. Be here in this moment. And then what I would invite you to do is think of a time that you were frustrated, angry, upset, or let's label it as an unpleasant event. So as you bring this unpleasant event forward, ask yourself, can I recognize what my experience was? So for me, it was, I'm recognizing that I was frustrated. And then asking yourself, can you acknowledge that the frustration is here? Can you accept that it's here? And again, a gentle reminder, that's not mean you like it or love it. You're simply saying, yes, I'm accepting that this is present. I'm accepting that it is here for just this moment, or it was there for that moment. And then I identify where it's the strongest. So for me, it was a combination of my mind and my stomach, and I can't really discern which one was stronger. So I'm gonna my stomach a little bit, but for me, it's stomach and then mind, I would say. And again, you can kind of see like I was working that out loud. It felt like it was both, and then as I zoomed into it, I could really feel it in my stomach. So I'm gonna identify that it's in my stomach the strongest. Maybe for you, you're like, well, I'm kind of feeling it in my chest and a little bit in my hands. Cool. We're getting used to identifying our emotions and identifying this experience. And then the end, you're not attaching to it. This is not you. You are experiencing, or you experience that event, that unpleasant event, that emotion. Most importantly, you're not attaching to it. You're not judging it. Again, recognize what is present, accept or acknowledge that it's here, identify where it's the strongest, perhaps. And then lastly, holding it without judgment or with non-attachment. And then lastly, moving into thinking of a time that was incredibly powerful for you. So maybe a time that you felt empowered, or you felt loved, or you felt that joy or laughter. Again, whatever comes forward, let's bring forward a pleasant event that you've experienced, a pleasant event that you've experienced. And again, maybe for some of you that brings a smile to your face or warms your heart. I'm actually thinking of Bo telling me about that story about how he's gathering information. So, for me, I recognize it. It's very easy to recognize. Ask yourself, can you acknowledge that it's here? Again, for me, very easy to acknowledge or accept that happened. And then identify or investigate where it resides. To me, it's like my stomach, my heart, and my mind. I can kind of feel this boom, boom, boom. And when I look at it, and those three, I really investigate it. And it feels it's the strongest in my mind for sure now. Absolutely, the strongest in my mind. And then what I would ask you to do very kindly is to ask yourself, can you hold this with non-judgment? Or can you not attach to this? Which I know is typically hard to do with pleasant events. But if you're able to train your mind to notice the impermanence of pleasant events, you can definitely use that same technique to notice the impermanence of frustrating events. So again, let's just notice what's present, right? Recognize it, accept it, identify, and again, non-attachment. So just asking yourself and planting this seed, not only to use this meditation formally that's on the website, right? Again, under Cultivating Calm, RAIN, but purposely at least using it once a day informally. And when you're ready, very slowly and gently allowing your eyes to open as we bring back this sense that we just cultivated. Cool. That's the practice this week, the practice of RAIN. I would highly recommend we do the formal practice and at least once kind of learn how to integrate it throughout life. Again, of course, if there's any questions ever, you can DM me on Instagram, Mindful Masse, Masse, or of course at my website, mindfulmike.ca. Okay, everybody? So thanks for the love. Thanks for the support. Thank you for keep showing up. I love it. I'll keep being here. All right. So, remind yourself if something comes up and you have questions, comments, concerns, please feel free to direct message me. Or I'm getting usually anywhere from 3 to 5 a week from this group. Cool. Well, thank you. I love these talks too. I love being able to talk to you. It's really fun. Okay, everybody. So thank you so much. And of course, if anything comes up and you want to DM me or message me, do not hesitate. Okay. I'm really getting back to people. Okay.